Hey everyone, welcome to show number 24 of Experience This. I am really excited for our special guest today, but first I want to introduce my co-host, Christian. Go ahead, tell us about yourself here.
Hey guys, Christian here from Magpie Travel. Delighted to be here, as always.
So our special guest is Michael Zeisser. He is the founder of FMZ Ventures and really just invests in the experiences economy. That is his thing. And we're excited to have him with us today. Michael, go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Thanks very much for having me, Christian and Bruce. Yes, I am a venture capital investor. I am highly specialized and invest only in companies that stage or distribute experiences. Believe deeply in the mega consumer trends of experiences over things, and very fortunate to be associated with a number of interesting companies such as GetYourGuide and Fever, Atlas Obscura, Bla Bla Car, Easol, and others. Before being a VC, I had the privilege to work for some remarkable entrepreneurs. Most recently, I was the head of the international investment organizations of Alibaba Group, founded by Jack Ma, of course. And prior to that, had the privilege to work for John Malone, who is the head of an investment entity called Liberty Media that owns large stakes in IAC, TripAdvisor, Expedia, Live Nation, Formula One, and a number of other media and or experience companies. And I started my career at a consulting firm, McKinsey and Company, where after a while I led the internet practice in New York.
Christian, what are your thoughts about what Michael's doing with our industry? And, where would you be if you had him as a resource as we do right now? What would be some of your key questions?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I love the breadth. I think we get caught up in our own sort of echo chamber of, I came from hop on, hop off. I'm still in hop on, hop off. And I talk to all the attractions and other bus and bike and boat companies. I think we get very caught up in the tourist things to do in the big cities. I'm in San Francisco and I know all the New York people. But I love that you've got the breadth of sort of the fever. You mentioned Formula One as an experience. I don't think most people in our space think of that as an experience. Clearly it is, right? All events really are experiences, but it doesn't get spoken of in the same circle. So I think that's interesting. And I feel like that's a piece we have missing. I mean, when you look at the industry, do you see verticals like you've got events companies here and you've got tours and activities here and you've got, do you look at it like that and that there needs to be more crossover, or is that fine?
No, actually, I think it's very insightful that you describe it this way, Christian. I do look at it much more broadly. I look at experiences much more broadly. And in fact, I do think that investors, certainly in my industry, tend to miss the big picture. Because they tend to look at it in very narrow categories. And it's, I think, a little bit of a classic case of focusing on the tree and missing the forest. So it's very, very clear to me that consumers have changed their preferences. And I think most people who are associated with our industry will agree with the general premise of experiences over things. And yes, particularly younger generations have definitely changed their spending pattern towards experiences away from things. Where I find people then don't know is if you ask the question, why Why is that happening? Why has that been happening? Is it just a fluke? Is it a fad? What are the reasons why this has been happening? And my own answer to this question, which is why I launched a fund dedicated to this industry, is I do think it is a permanent shift. I do think we are in the early innings of the rise of a new economic sector, which of course I call the experience economy. I do think it's entirely plausible to think that we are in the early innings of a new economic sector, because we've had new sectors emerge for the past 250 years. In the 18th century, we were all working on farms, and then we had the emergence of a new sector called the industrial sector. And certainly most people would agree that sometimes in the 20th century, a new sector emerged that we call the service economy. And most people would agree that towards the end of the 20th century, a new sector emerged that's called the information economy. So I think it's totally in the natural progression of our economic system to see new economic sectors emerge. And I do believe we are in the early innings of the emergence of an experience economy. And the reason why people are shifting towards experiences is, I think, rooted in our fundamental human needs. And I use the Maslow hierarchy of needs to basically guide my own thinking about human needs. And as we all know, the lower level needs in that pyramid, food, shelter, safety, are very different from the higher level needs in that pyramid, which are belonging, personal growth, self-actualization, and so forth. My insight is that we address the lower level needs with things, and it takes experiences to address the higher level needs. So for example, if a person doesn't feel good about herself, then she can go out and buy a Rolex or a Porsche. But as we all know, it's not going to help her feel better about herself. Rather, what would help her feel better about herself would be to, for example, go to therapy. And that's, of course, an experience. Or what would help her would be to take time and travel, because as we all know, part of the reason why we travel is actually to find ourselves. And in many ways, we go far away to find our place in the world. And so to me, I think about experiences in multiple categories that are different than the conventional industry categories. I think about kinetic experiences, which is what we're talking about here, the travel, the music, the sports. But I also think about psychotherapeutic experiences. I'm an investor in Headspace, as you know, and that includes eCBT and all the new companies that create new delivery methods to address, frankly, serious societal issues that we have with loneliness and depression and anxiety. So I also think about functional experiences, which is how to add functionality to humans through learning, longevity, and I think about virtual experiences. So I define experiences as solutions to higher level needs, and I think of them as falling into one of four categories: kinetic experiences, psychotherapeutic experiences, functional experiences, and virtual experiences. So yes, I think if you look at the world this way, this is certainly not a revelation. If you look at the world through different lens, you tend to see things differently. And I believe that you tend to see new opportunities. So
hey, it's Marika from the Von Mac Agency here with your Tourism Marketing Half Minute. Let's talk about expansion. Are you thinking about opening another location for your business? Here's a fact to consider. According to a recent study, 70% of consumers are more likely to do business with a company that has a physical location within their community. So don't be afraid to set up some roots or fully engage with the CVB or DMO in the new area. This can help you get some referrals. And while your marketing strategy will surely be well researched, don't discount those key resources you probably already have in place. Go digital, create lookalike audiences based on your past purchasers, and target ads in those new geos for the win.
I do want to hone in on one piece that at Arrival, we're starting to say, you know what, we need to focus more on events. And events can equal sporting events, music, festivals, shows. Right now, I will tell you that our data, when we say this industry is $270 billion globally, does not include that. And I've been talking to Douglas about, we need to really do the right kind of market sizing, because those are absolutely experiences. Now it's a big picture because we got to deal with all the major league sports here in the US. We've got to deal with soccer, or as known around the world, football, the F1 and NASCAR, like all the music. That's a huge piece. How do you both look at that? You know, let's forget about tours, activities, attractions for a second and hone in on events and where that fits in the category of in-destination experiences, and what the opportunities are, and what people in our audience should be thinking about when they think about events. Kristen, do you have a thought about that?
Well, yeah, I want to kind of divert. I think that's a good question. And I was going to ask something similar. So the TAM, right, the total addressable market, I think Arrival's got that at 250 billion. Airbnb's got that at 1.3 trillion, because they do include this broader. So my question would be to Michael is, just because the market's 1.3 trillion, or as you describe it, you could probably call it 5 trillion once you start broadening it that far. But that doesn't mean that a single company should tackle all of it, right? So it's fine to have verticals within that. So my question was going to be, you know, you involved with GetYourGuide, and GetYourGuide is still sticking within this tours and activities and attraction space. Is that okay? Or do you think a company like that should be looking broader, and should everyone be looking to market as broad as you see it?
So, you know, I don't believe in shoulds to begin with. And so I think companies and leaders of companies need to do what they think is right to achieve whatever ambitions they're setting for themselves. In the case of GetYourGuide, I certainly subscribe to the position of the company that it's still early stages in terms of digitizing tours and activities, and building the iconic OTA, if you want, for the experience economy, just focusing on tours and activities. And so I actually think it's wise on the part of the company to focus first on this market and really build its strength and build its position on that market. I think the way to answer your question, Christian, is as a function of time scale. You know, what is the priority now, and what can be the priority later? So I've learned that strategy, meaning what should a company do, is very much a craft. It's certainly not a formula, and it depends on a number of things, including and influenced foremost by the ambition of the founders, of the senior team. So I think GetYourGuide is a high quality company, and I think it has a lot of opportunity ahead of itself, and I think it is proceeding and building its capabilities and its presence in a very thoughtful manner, which makes me optimistic about the future.
So Brian, sorry, Bruce, I'm dominating here, but Brian Chesky, for those that don't know, CEO of Airbnb, he suggested in a recent interview, I think it was with Jason Calacanis, that there could be another company the size of Airbnb in this sector. Airbnb's what, $80-90 billion company?
Yeah.
That should be TripAdvisor or Viatour's sector or GetYourGuide sector. Do you think the potential is there for them to grow?
Yeah.
Like you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I do just want to say, I think Brian is probably the most remarkable leader we have in the industry, and I am in awe over what he's accomplished with Airbnb, and I think he's really someone who deserves to be listened to and taken very seriously. To me, I mentioned I had the privilege to work with Jack Ma at Alibaba Group, and so I have spent a lot of my career in the world, if you want, or the digital world of things. Obviously, Alibaba in the East and Amazon in the West are the two dominant platforms by which consumers can purchase things. And it actually, just the reason why I'm framing it this way is because it makes obvious that there really is not an Amazon for experiences that exists yet. But to me, it just seems completely reasonable if you accept the premise that consumers want experiences more than things. It would seem very reasonable to me to expect that there would be something that looks like at least one Amazon of experiences. You know, maybe there could be 3 or 4 Amazons of experiences. We'll all find out together. But the fact that there is none today just does not feel like that makes sense. So yes, I do believe Brian is absolutely right in that. I'm hopeful FMZ will be associated with some of the iconic digital platforms that make experiences available to consumers.
Well, and right now, I mean, you are involved with GetYourGuide, so they're one of the leaders and certainly an iconic platform, but mostly in Europe, right? They're not known globally, and they're from a B2C perspective, not really much. Viatour is number 1, owned by TripAdvisor. How come they haven't blown up as you're thinking, like to the point of dominating the world of experiences with all the resources that TripAdvisor has available for them? Is there something holding that back?
I mean, as you know, Bruce, COVID really threw a wrench into a lot of plans recently. And so I think both companies are still growing very rapidly. And the fact that I am optimistic for both of these companies actually doesn't mean that it's not difficult and challenging. The task of ingesting the inventory of an extremely fragmented industry base is monumental, frankly. And it's still, that's why I keep on going back to, it's still early stage in our industry. I would use words like the productization of experiences. We're still very early. The whole pricing mechanisms of experiences, we're still very, very early. The whole process of creating memories from experiences is still very, very early. And so I think we've maybe grown accustomed to these digital companies that are purely digital grow very quickly. But when you have humans involved, which of course we do in experiences, or as Christians say, with bosses, we have real assets involved. These things just do take more time. But I don't see any reason not to believe that there will be, as I said, one or more Amazons of experiences.
Yeah, I feel like I want to go back now and reread The Everything Store, which is one of the books about Amazon. And what I was thinking in this industry, and maybe you could comment on this as well, Bruce, I think there's lots of excuses, like it's different. Like when I'm buying my Taylor Swift ticket, I want to go to Ticketmaster and buy it, and I want to buy my bus tour and GetYourGuide. And I think maybe we assume that because we're used to that and we know the brands. And I bet they said that back then. Oh, I want to go to this place to buy a book online. I want to go to this place and buy a washing machine. And it turns out we didn't. We want to buy it all from Amazon. I wonder if we make excuses as companies why we shouldn't cross over and sell the Everything Store in experiences just by saying it's different. It's easy to say it's different over here. It is more fragmented than any other industry, I think. So maybe it is different, but maybe it's...
I mean, you can argue, obviously, about the fragmentation. When Michael was saying that, I was thinking about it. But we were talking about Airbnb. I mean, is it more fragmented than what Airbnb has to do by aggregating all of the personal condos and townhouses and houses in the world to put them on one platform?
But that's the same product, at least, right? You're dealing with one product type. Yeah, different number of rooms. And
yeah, but now they have how many actual product types across their top of their site?
Yeah, they made some categories, whatever.
Categories, yeah.
Still a home. It's still a home with a triangle home. Or
But fragmentation is the challenge. And then, like Michael, you were speaking about the just pricing. I mean, so Christian's very involved in an organization called Octo, which is all about creating standards so that an operator can have a ResTech, they can have a standard API that all the distributors can ingest. And that's a long haul on its own, creating Octo and getting that to work for everyone in the business. But I do think that's a big part of the challenge, right? Just being able to have pricing populate into
absolutely, and standardization. I mean, think about the grocery industry with our UPC codes, and but these things like the standardization, these things take time to evolve. The industry as an ecosystem needs to feel the need for these standards, and then they need to be put in place, and people have different objectives and not always the same. And to me, this is all part of the wonder, frankly, of creating a new economic sector.
So let's jump into that for a minute. Let's talk startups. And I know that you probably talk to startups and see startups every day in the experiences industry. Where are the successes going to come from? What have you seen that's really interesting that you can look at, whether it's actually a company or even more so just a type of company? Like, where is that next opportunity going to come from?
That's a very hard question to answer generically. And if you make me answer it generically, it might feel a little superficial, but... you
can go specific of different types of companies.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say you're invested in Fever, which is a different type of OTA. Probably a lot of our audience isn't even that familiar with Fever, but maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that and what you think of the prospects there. Or does that open up the idea of there's that kind of company? I'm fishing a little bit here for sure, Michael.
Fever is a marketplace of experiences, just like GetYourGuide is a marketplace of experiences. The experiences on Fever would not be considered tours and activities. They would be considered events, maybe, and most importantly, Fever is a platform for locals. So if you are in San Francisco or New York, and if you are a young person, you will find things to do this weekend on Fever, things to do in New York, in your local area. And of course, as we all know, GetYourGuide and Viatour primarily address visitors, not locals. So I view the two companies, Fever and GetYourGuide, as completely different, addressing different use cases with different types of experiences, which is why I'm thinking that there probably will not be one Amazon, because although the industry, the experience economy, is still very, very early, we can already see how it is structuring itself, in that certain sectors or subsectors are already emerging. So that suggests to me that there'll probably be a handful of Amazons of experiences focused on different user segments and maybe different use cases.
So I just want to mention, you spent a lot of time at Alibaba, so obviously you know the Asian market. We've got Klook over in Hong Kong, right, which is kind of moved at the same speed as GetYourGuide almost, and they went typically Asian. They just went broad, right? They sell trains and now hotels and flights, and didn't they just buy a couple of stadiums worth of Taylor Swift ticket? Something, they bought out the stadium or blocks or something.
They have some kind of partnership deal going. I could look it up if you want, but yeah.
Pretty serious. So they've gone broad, which seems to be fairly typical for Asia. I think if you do that in the West, you got a lack of discipline or lack of focus almost, right? Like, what are you doing? Is that just the way it is? Is that the way? I'm not going to say it should be, because you don't say should, but is that just the way?
It definitely is the case. The industry sometimes uses the term super app. Maybe you've heard that term. And there are a bunch of super apps in the world, and they're all basically in Asia, in China. So these are companies that were brands that fulfill a much wider set of needs for their users than their equivalent businesses would do in the Western Hemisphere. It's a speculation as to whether in the United States there is room, or in the West there is room for super apps. Certainly so far, a few have tried, but none have really succeeded at creating a super app. And there can be a question of whether the markets are sufficiently similar that you would see similar developments. And that's where probably my point of view is that things are quite different. So my experience working at Alibaba has really humbled me a lot and opened my eyes to the considerable differences in terms of consumer wants and needs between Eastern consumers and Western consumers. The needs and the wants are very, very different. And the other factor that I think is important to keep in mind is that in the West, the structure of our industries, you mentioned ticketing a few minutes ago, Christian, and for example, in the West, in the US, we've had very long-standing legislation about primary tickets and secondary tickets, and so we have regulatory frameworks that have influenced industry structure, and these constraints, frankly, for the most part, do not exist. And if they do exist, they exist in very different forms in China or in Eastern markets. And so to me, actually, it's much more logical to see Eastern markets evolve differently from Western markets, because there are these deep differences in consumer uses and wants, and these deep differences in existing industry structure between the two spheres, if you want. So given these differences, why would you expect similar evolutions?
I want to just summarize that, because we didn't expect to get into a whole super app discussion. And there is a lot there. We actually had a whole session on it at our Bangkok event pretty recently. And it is very, very China focused. And then there is Grab, that is the rest of Asia. I would argue Klook is a travel super app that's comparable to what Hopper's trying to do as a travel super app. And it bugs me a little bit when they try to say they're a super app, because there's so much more that's not part of super app. So I think translating your answer was, Klook is going out more horizontal as a travel super app versus a GetYourGuide that is still focused on being an OTA for tours, activities, attractions. Yeah. Let's switch gears quickly to ResTech. We only have a few more minutes left, and would love to get your opinion of the deal announced about a week ago with ResD and Checkfront merging. Any thoughts on that and what you see in the ResTech industry? Is there going to be a lot more? Is there going to be a major roll up? Is this the beginning? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the different sources suggest different numbers, but generally it appears there are about 200 plus ResTech companies in the industry. That's clearly too many companies. And we now are in a completely different funding environment than we were 2 years ago or so. Money is no longer free. And so the combination of just too many competitors and access to capital constrained relative to what it was, to me, clearly suggests that there will be a lot of industry consolidation and a lot more industry consolidation. I do expect that this will continue to be a very fragmented industry, but maybe what we'll see is the emergence of 10 or 20 large ResTech companies. I don't think this is one, in my industry, people use the term winner take all or winner take most a lot. And I don't think this is that kind of an industry, but clearly, in my judgment, 200 competitors is too many.
In this environment, do you see this as a natural next step then, that specifically a private equity firm comes in, maybe dangles a checkbook and says, okay, who wants to sell out right now? Let's do this roll up, as it's called. Is that fairly typical and maybe a positive progression?
Yeah, I think it's a positive progression. Yes, exactly. It's all these things, Christian. It makes good sense. If it's basic arithmetic. If you have companies that are too small to gain scale, and if the competition is too intense for companies to gain scale, then combining different companies to offer better services to end users just makes very good economic and industrial sense. So certainly this is a very common and natural evolutionary path for many industries. So I see no reason why we wouldn't see more of it in ResTech.
One of my concerns, though, on a roll-up of ResTech is a lot of them are they really have a lot of common capabilities. So if I was going to acquire one and I already own 3, I'm just buying the client list, right? Am I really buying much more than a client list at that point? So let's say Checkfront and ResD decide they want to, or their private equity firm says, let's go buy 2 or 3 more. What are they truly getting except additional clients?
They're getting clients, they're getting more talent, they might be getting new capabilities, they may be getting new reach into new geographies or into new areas of specialization. So it's roll-ups, as you call them, have been around for decades and are viewed in the financial industry or in the investment community as potentially very attractive investment opportunities. So I'm not surprised at all to see this start, and I believe we'll see a lot more of it.
Would you be concerned if you were a ResTech and you've already raised 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollars? How, and you're not the leader, right? Like we know there's one leader, Fair Harbor, and then there's everyone else. And some of those everyone else's have raised quite a bit of money. Mm-hmm. So that's going to make it hard for them to get acquired, isn't it?
This is so context specific and so situation specific. It's hard to say something like useful. I would say it always depends on the price, of course, and it always depends on the situation of the company. So if the company has found a niche and is profitable, then it's a totally different scenario than if the company is basically undifferentiated and losing money and running out of cash. So it's very hard to say one thing will happen always, but as a general proposition, there's I believe a lot of reasons to believe there'll be more consolidation.
Right. I've got a quick startup question if we have time, Bruce, for just a quick. Yeah, just a question about not GetYourGuide as a startup, but an actual startup. Somebody starting today with a Preseed or something. The environment's obviously different now, mainly for later stage, I believe, but maybe interest rates are going to be here for a while.
Yes,
they're going to be fairly sticky. So is it different? And I talk to a lot of startups. So if I'm a brand new startup, 2 people, Preseed, should I be building differently today, or is it still okay to look at a seed and then an A in a couple of years? And is that path still available?
It's an interesting question. When you say, Christian, should I be building differently today? What I want to say back to you is, well, differently from what? My answer would be that if it's different, maybe from how startups were built 2 or 3 years ago, when money was free, then yes, you should definitely build differently. But if different is from how startups should always have been built, with an obsessive focus on an end user and scrappiness and efficiency, then no, those are still the recipes for success. I think technologies, the AI stuff that you're an expert in, the mixed reality technologies, what Apple introduced with the Vision device is extraordinary. And yes, of course, it'll take 10 years, maybe, for it or its successor versions to become mass market devices, but that doesn't take away from the power of this new platform. And so I'm as excited as ever about the opportunities for entrepreneurs to create new value for end users by leveraging these technologies. And as an investor, I've always preferred to invest in companies in difficult times, because when you create a company in difficult times, then you have by necessity to create your company with values like be efficient, be scrappy, don't waste the resources, be really focused in creating value and making something that an end user will want. Those are awesome values, and those are the kinds of good values that create great cultures. And they're very different from the free-for-all environment where money is free and it doesn't matter if as a leader you are disciplined or undisciplined about resource allocations, and you're happy to have 1,000 flowers bloom environment where efficiency and focus basically are just not that important. You know, that tends to create a very different set of values and cultures. And the former, I think, is much more resilient than the latter. So I'm very excited about the opportunities in our industry for new business formation right now.
I think that is a great place to end. Michael, we really appreciate you being with us today. Lots of good food for thought for the industry to think about, startups and existing companies. And we will see you hopefully in Orlando at Arrival 360 Orlando for more of the great commentary from yourself. And Christian, thank you as always. And until next time, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.